Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast, career advice from people in the business. This week, I'm talking to artist John Gallagher. With an illustrious career that includes serving as the director of concept art at renowned video game developer BioWare and contributing as a production illustrator to blockbuster hits such as The Expanse, Once Upon a Time, The Flash, Supergirl, The Boys, and many more, John brings a wealth of experience to the table. I spoke to John about his route into the industry, what it's like being a concept artist on massive productions like Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, and also what challenges AI might present to artists in the future. Enjoy. So, first question I usually ask everybody is, did you go to uni? Did you study?
Well, I actually went to art school for a year, straight out of high school. My mother stressed academics and performance and leaving myself some options.
Hmm.
So I had a number of choices, but the thing about the gravity of being a creative is that it's almost irresistible. It's like escaping an event horizon. You can't really do it. So I was weighing the options of becoming a lawyer, becoming doctors, standard professional routes, but did go to art school for a year, and it was dreadful. Um, and that's only my experience. So let's be clear.
Yeah.
Every artist has a story, and it's usually some sort of wild EKG uh, hieroglyphics about how they got to where they are. But in my case, art school was horrendous. It was predominantly at that time, and this is the mid 80s, early mid 80s, it was overwhelmingly conceptual and conceptual driven work. So while ideas are the currency with which we craft our stories, that's not what we were talking about. This is more of a esoteric, navel-gazing pursuit, and I wasn't really interested in that. My only real mission at the time was, I said, I'd love to be able to tell stories visually. I want to work with cool people, and I'd like to make a few bucks doing it. So those three things
Hmm.
formed a cascade event of not a chance, Chief. So uh, I wasn't drummed out of school. I did well. Did fine, but it just didn't hit. It just
Hmm.
didn't feel right. And that's only for me. So I qualify that. So internet, don't come at me. Okay. That only for me. For
Yeah.
many people, they found it the most extraordinary experience. So what I did is I called it, put a pin in it, decided to live a little bit, travel, enjoy my life, explore, because I'd only ever been in school. I'd only, for 12 years, I was in school right to college. Uh, and every summer I was working to save up money to go to school for all of high school. So there wasn't really that, pause to consider other options. So I took a few years off and went back to school and got my diploma in broadcasting. And that has actually served me extraordinarily well,
Hmm.
consider the broad-based set of skills that come with the curriculum. In
Right.
addition, I was drawing the entire time as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
which leads me to how I got my first job as a professional artist.
Go for it.
And I can't buy it honestly, genuinely. I had to go back to my hometown in Edmonton. I attended school in Calgary. It was about 200 miles south of Edmonton in Alberta. Um, Landlocked province right beside British Columbia, where I live now on the west coast of Canada. Uh, it's only important to know that I went from one city to the other. Go from Calgary to do my practicum in Edmonton. And during the course of doing my practicum and introducing myself to the broadcasting community in Edmonton, I started doing pickup pieces, little bumpers for the newscasts where you
Hmm.
talk to some interesting local craftsperson or an artisan or somebody doing some wild, interesting kind of outlier activity. And in the course of this, I was introduced to BioWare when it was six guys, like literally six
Hmm.
dudes in Greg's basement. And they had just moved into their horrendous office above a used bookstore, tucked over in a little corner of a side street in nowhere, Edmonton. And I did a piece on them because they had just joined up with a studio out of Calgary. and they were working on a game called Shattered Steel. And we had some cool visuals, and it was very early in video games, so it's always very exciting. Fill the screen with all sorts of old school razzle dazzle. And in the process of that, they said, "Well, can you do anything else?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I can draw like a son of a bitch." And they're like, "Okay, we've heard that from lots of people." I go, "Yeah, but you never heard it from me. You've never seen my portfolio before. There was no internet to advertise yourself." So long story short, I started at BioWare like 2 weeks later, and I was with them for 9 years, 25 million games. Uh, Went from a council of about 8 or 9 of us to 330
Wow.
in the course of the time that I was there. And that set me up for working in film. I took a couple years off, and then I found myself in film in 2008.
Wow. And so the stuff you were doing at BioWare and all of the stuff you do, in fact, is that all in the computer? It's not hand drawn, but it's hand
I
drawn on the
started out,
computer or
I mean, like I'm sure the majority of your audience of a certain vintage.
mm.
Uh, and I say that with no disrespect. We were a pre-digital era.
Hmm.
You did it old school. It was all analog. It was pen and paper, marker, crayon, anything you could get your hands on to make marks. Um, but at BioWare, the vast majority of the heavy lifting I did conceptually was vellum paper and markers and pen uh, and pencil. So I started to slowly transition because the tools, in fairness to the tools, as tool sets evolve, they often start out a little rusty. You know, you really gotta square the circle on some of this stuff, because when Photoshop first started out, it was a bit of a mutt.
Hmm.
And until it got the layer system working properly, and brushes were stable, I was finding that I had to use 3 or 4 different programs to kind of get results.
Mm.
So I was still relying heavily, I was leaning heavily on analog, because it was giving me quick, interesting, diverse results. I could just throw it on the light box and just, hundreds of iterations very, very quickly. Effectively, that was my layer system. And given the massive, and I would never do it again. It's madness what we did. But I was so grateful we did have that opportunity. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drawings.
Mm.
So you get extraordinarily fast and extraordinarily confident, and you have faith. You know how to drop a deadline. You know how to do you spot your blacks in an illustration. You're and then when you learn digital, as much as those foundational elements are there, they're strong, they're uh, they're ever present. You still have to learn new tricks with
Yeah.
digital. It still requires some rewiring, and certainly teaching your hands, a new pantomimes. I
Yeah.
think that's important because you form a different relationship. There's too many happy accidents in digital to be able to be preemptively predicting that with analog.
Yeah.
So there's there was a long period of transition there where I felt what was happening, because I would do like a lot of people did, and a lot of my friends will share the similar story, right? We'd do a pencil sketch, like a type pencil sketch, then you scan it,
Mm.
you clean it up in Photoshop. It's very much a multi-stage process. And what happens is you lose a lot of the energy in those drawings. You lose a
Mm.
lot of the discovery, a lot of the joy of peeling things back and finding out new ways to solve it in virtual space. So that got me to I bought a comic store
Mm.
in Edmonton. I spent a couple of years with my partners building up the enterprise. It's long since sold and been rebranded, but it was a wonderful opportunity there, like just a complete shift in interest. And video games, you age in dog years, and I mean, it takes everything out of you. You leave it all on the field. So I felt like, as I'm sure many of your other guests have probably intimated, there's times when you just need to not do the work. when you need to be away from it, and you fill up your experiential reservoir, which has been depleted by, well, and in the best way.
Mm.
It bled you while you're smiling. You're this has been fantastic, but I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
So working at the shop, and that being a part of my life, uh, it allowed me to move different levers and to run a business properly. So that, of course, helps as you move into being a contractor in film.
So then, so I've looked at your IMDb profile, did the usual bit of stalking I do on people. Lots of different credits on there. So you got credits as illustrator, concept artist, graphic artist, pre-visualization artist. Are these all different things, or are they all effectively the same kind of work?
Well, they run adjacently. Like the first big film job I had, and it was only relatively minor in terms of tenure, was I worked with a subcontractor on X-Men 3 Last Stand.
Hmm.
And so I was working in previs, which is its own kind of beautiful animal that's, it's, I think, extraordinarily important. The far more moving pieces you have on a larger project, probably getting it all cogently put together,
Mm.
dovetailing with the storyboarding, and the director and the VFX producer and everybody can come in and say, this is the page we need to be on. It's the first critical step in moving the story forward. Um, that was enlightening, and it was a little daunting, but with that gave me insight into working on large features, which are largely siloed. Different departments work in many cases. You would think that this smoothly integrated sharing of resources, I'm sure it's much better now, depending on the project. But at the time, I mean, it was still very much like 2006, right? It's still seat of the pants. And what that did, I wasn't doing any concept designing, but I was learning lenses, depth of field, and a multitude of other kind of crash course, being your own director of photography. That allowed me to inhabit some of the design work later, like approaching it as in, what's it going to look like in my movie versus what is it going to look like in my video game?
Mm.
And it really allows you to switch again, to move gears and get your own circuit boards working properly in terms of how to solve problems visually. So the very first project, big project, was that. Then I worked on a massive documentary for Discovery, which was Mars Rising, which allowed me to access a different tool set, which was working with a multitude of vendors and service providers and 95-year-old former Nazi scientists that live in
Right.
Florida. Because it was very much, you have to talk about the origins of the space program. And as we know, it's divided between the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, and NASA. So between all of those things, you're just building up this kind of, you're filling up your suitcase with more and more experiences. And I didn't want to be anybody who was like, oh, I worked in video games, I think I'm a big shot. That may be private moment for me. In film, no one really gives a damn.
Mm.
They're like, oh, you did some cool stuff, good for you, kid. Because you're typically working with high achievers everywhere.
Mm.
So they just go, oh, cool, your company sold for $180 million, good for you. Then my first concept gig was back in Edmonton, was for a series called Fear Itself, which was episodic anthology. So every single one of them was like a mini film.
Mm.
We had a budget between $2 and $5 million per episode, and we created mini films every 8 days, which was a phenomenal crash course in being confident doing all sorts of everything. I was credited as a graphic artist, but I was doing some storyboards and I was doing some illustration as well. So it really let me get into the deep end. And then the designer on the show, who's been a mentor since, inspirational man, delightful creator, named Steve Gagan. he put the he put it in front of me and said, "Well, are you going to stay in Edmonton forever and be Mr. whatever you are, or are you going to come to Vancouver and be a star?" I was like, "Oh, wow, how did you frame it that way?" So I took the bait. My backup plan was to be a college instructor in digital illustration.
So practicalities. How do you have an agent? How do you get work? If I'm starting out in this business, is it all word of mouth? What's the kind of how do you get those
Um,
gigs?
yeah, I would suggest to anybody that is starting, and I don't have the world's largest network. Um, I'm not, I won't lie. I have a lot of friends and a lot of colleagues and a lot of people that I love, respect, and support, but I don't have friendships just hoping that they can get me a gig.
Mm,
You know, like I'm friends because I think they're awesome human beings. Um, so in terms of the actual practical approach, yeah, unfortunately, it's not a particularly welcoming industry in that sense.
mm,
It is easy to apply to become, for all intents and purposes, what somebody has to do to become a member of the film industry
mm,
is depending on their specialty, what they have chosen to be a part of. At least for the art department, which is my area of expertise, I can tell you, you apply to be an art department permittee. Step one, you
yeah.
just literally go to the website, and in Vancouver, it's IATSE 891. You go to the website, you download the form, you fill it out, you send in your portfolio. If the portfolio is reviewed by the art department reps, and if they like what they see and it's clear that you're interested in narrative storytelling in some way and your aptitudes point in that direction, you become a permittee. What that means is you're on a list, and members get preferential treatment, union members, of course. But if you're fortunate and someone has to bow out from a show or something else, or somebody really likes what you're doing and you clearly show above and beyond capability, they'll reach out to you and you can get a permit to work on a show.
Mm,
Then you build up your hours. And to become a member of the union, a full member, no longer a permit, you have to have worked a certain number of days. And typically that's anywhere from 30 to 60 days.
yeah.
And it can be on one show or two shows or three shows. And that constantly changes to make it easier to bring in more permits, because it used to
Mm,
be very prohibitive. Like it was like you had to have like 30 days on 5 different shows or whatever it was. Probably exaggerating, but it was kind of crazy what you used to have to do.
mm,
It's a little easier now, but it gets more stringent as you want to move up. If you
yeah.
want to, for example, become an art director or become a production designer, you really gotta you really gotta have your foot on the gas.
Yeah. And the other thing I noticed, obviously, you've got your website, which has got some amazing images on it. I'm definitely going to get one of those for my man cave. Um, is that selling your own prints? Is that a profitable side hustle for someone who's in your business, or is it something you just do because you want to get your artwork out there?
I'll tell you, I think I'm one of like two or three people I know who does it, and I don't do it um, for any other reason than comics are why I draw in the first place.
Mm,
I owe everything to comics. They were the groundswell. They were the ground zero. They were any sort of epicenter kind of descriptor you want to bring. What I love monster movies. I loved all of that. I grew up in the era of the original Hammer films. I watched all those. I saw the Universal Monster. That was my diet. That
yeah.
was my steady diet. And bad TV from the 70s. But above all things, it was comics. Comics spoke to me. That was the siren song. And I wanted to, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm not inventing a narrative here. I wanted to give back in some way. I wanted to honor this, the origins of my little story. And I started doing, because you have to sit and wait sometimes
Mm,
when you send out a concept to somebody and you're waiting for notes. You don't want to sit there and just fart around and watch bullshit videos on YouTube. It was like you want to work. You want to
mm,
keep working on your skills. And that's what it was. It was a skill building exercise. And I thought, well, what do I love more than anything? And I'll continue to practice all the time to get better at this stuff. I thought, well, yeah, superheroes. So I started posting them just, for, hey, I wonder if people really enjoy this. And I've been nervous, man. I'm not going to lie. My very first, and I tell anybody this, it's a true story. My very first Comic-Con was in 2013 here in Vancouver at Fan Expo. And I was like, I don't get nervous about anything. The only day I've ever been nervous was the day my daughter was born.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, kind of unshakable when it comes to that sort of thing, because you get so used to certain rhythms and certain cadences, you're just like, nah, anxiety really ain't for me. It's not a good jacket to wear. I understand it plagues other people, but in my case, I thought it wouldn't be a very good bedfellow. So let's use therapy as well as we can and make sure that that's not a thing for us. But the long and short of it was, first show I was nervous, and because I didn't want to let down fans, like other pros. I know there's usual, bullshit circular firing squad. They love you, but they want to knife you. It's the standard rigmarole of creators, right? They're like, I love what you do, but I hate that you're good at it, or a permutation thereof.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to let down fans. I wanted to give them a new version of, or maybe something they hadn't seen a lot of. And over those 10 years, 11 years, I've built up a bit of a fan base, and they're loyal and they're supportive and respectful. And I've managed to do some comic covers and all of that.
Obviously, you've got superheroes, sci-fi, fantasy artwork. Is there any character you particularly enjoy drawing?
Silver Surfer.
Oh, that's a good one. Why?
Well, first of all, Jack Kirby is all five guys on my Mount Olympus. No, that's not fair. Ralph McQuarrie, Sid Mead, Mobius. I mean, there's a few other luminaries, but I think Jack was responsible for just casually creating universes, and there's something so astonishing to witness and frequently and regularly witness that kind of genius. And I don't throw that word around very much, but Silver Surfer, because I connected to the character, not the mournful woe is me endless Stan Lee soliloquies, but more about the character in essence. That you make a noble sacrifice and life is still a complicated mess. But I was always drawn to the stars. I'm too big to be an astronaut. So to me, he struck me as the perfect, elegant solution to how do you travel the stars and experience the most astonishing things. And so I still haven't done the perfect Silver Surfer drawing yet.
Right.
I don't think I ever will, but he's a character very much I take as a personal challenge to try and get to the best, or perhaps to frame it a little bit differently, my personal best of how I would present the character to Jack, like how I would take the knee,
bend the knee, show him the picture.
What do you think of this?
Yeah.
And then there's other characters that are just a hoot. I mean, you never get tired, and the reason there are many of them in terms of their iconography are so popular, and because they're based, right? Like Batman is always fun to draw. Wolverine is always fun to draw. The Hulk is always fun to draw. Like there's characters, the reason that they're so persistently superlative and endlessly popular is that the iconography, their form language is delightful to get in there and dig. And you can offer different permutations of that character. Silver Surfer, I think, is pretty much surfer, and that's it.
Yeah.
You either nail it or you don't, in my opinion. Only in my opinion. So again, internet, don't come at me. but other characters do allow a broader range of interpretations, like Batman,
Yeah.
different time eras, different the Hulk. I mean, everybody has their hot take on the Hulk. Wolverine, again, all the very popular kind of Spider-Man even has an extraordinary range of options in
Yeah.
terms of how you want to interpret that character. And I'm very much a method illustrator too. I make a point of familiarizing myself with what other people are doing to interpret that character. And like I go for best of breed, in my opinion. Like I look at who I think is the definitive or the one of many definitive kind of key creators and how they interpret certain characters. Maybe emulate that. I also collaborate with other artists, which I think makes me a bit of a rarity.
Mm.
I collaborate with sculptors, not quite a number of sculptors, and we're all friends. We have free exchange of assets and skill sets. I think reaching out into the community to do that, and people whose work you really enjoy, and say, "Hey, man, are you okay if I use one of your statues for this really fun thing I'm working on?" And they're like, "Absolutely."
Mm.
And so then when they go to a show when they're selling 3D prints of their work or the STLs or raw or whatever, they have an accompanying poster that goes
Mm.
with whatever statue they're selling. So there's really it strikes me as kind of what you would do anyway. It's a collaborative medium as far as I understand it, but it seems in digital art especially, it's occasionally people get quite siloed. They just kind of lock themselves into their capsule and do their thing, and their work's wonderful. But I don't see a lot of collaboration, which is one of the great joys of discovery, is like how other people interpret things that you both know of. You
Yeah.
both have your own version of, but then when you come together, you have a version that's stronger than either of you, perhaps, or different rather, or both, than you would have perhaps come up with on your own. That to me keeps it constantly fresh and new.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So I said I was going to give you my fun questions. There was one very unfun question I'm going to ask you, which I'm sure you get asked about all
Oh
the
yeah,
time,
please.
which is AI. So how I'm sick to death of seeing, wonder what Brad Pitt would look like as Doctor Doom. These things that just keep popping up on my feed. What's that like as an artist? And is there any upside to this? You talked earlier about, going from pen and paper to Photoshop. Is there an upside to this, or is it all a bleak future?
No, I don't think it's a big future at all. At least for myself, I wasn't. I had seen Art Breeder and I'd seen a number of prompt programs early in the day, and I said, "Well, this is AI's been around for a while.
Mhm.
Please don't get excited about it." I think it's a shallow money trench that's 1,000 miles wide, 1,000 miles long, and an inch deep, because everything about this is final result oriented, with no process, no engagement, no agency, no intention. And while there are a cynical few uh, that insist that it's, the sky's falling, I go, but yeah, you kind of live like that anyway.
Mm.
So you're easy to dismiss on the edges of the discussion. I think in the middle of it, you should have an evolving perspective. I think it's mandatory to. I made myself very acquainted with the tools, and in a matter of a couple of days, you push it to the very precipice of what it's capable of. That's not a great sign.
Mm.
That tells me there's not a lot of density, and there
Yeah.
never will be. That's never the point. The point is it's a surface ploy,
Mm.
and uh, I'm a as much as it paints you with a sort of conspiratorial brush. I'm like, please always follow the money.
Mm.
This is this is like cloud storage. This is going to make 5 people unbelievably wealthy, and for the rest of us, it's going to skate. It's a disruptive event,
Mm.
absolutely, and it's an imitative one. So I don't ever see or foresee, and everyone's like, yeah, but you don't know. And I said, well, I have friends in the game.
Mm.
I have colleagues and friends who work with AI directly. They don't
Mm.
use the programs, they build the programs. And they're like, yeah, it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
But it's so easy to get excited about it because it's easy to proliferate imagery,
Mm.
especially for people who feel empowered. And now I'm not I'm not going to gatekeep and tell people that they can't use prompts to, you know, in some cases create really hilarious, novel, fun, weird, goofy shit
Mm.
that I never would have thought of. I'm not threatened by seeing work that I never would have thought of.
Mm.
I think sometimes the level of pattern recognition by the generative models concerns some people because the acuity and the execution is so extraordinary, but superficial. Like ultimately, it's like meringue, right? It's just
Mm.
a exercise in technique. There's no storytelling. Rather than thinking that you've drawn the conclusion on the basis of the most superficial of evidence, I would encourage anybody to learn the tools. Learn how stable diffusion works.
Mm.
Learn how control net works. Learn how this happens, how these algorithms build information, and bring that into your own process. Bring that uh, disruptive event
Mm.
into your own process. Try new things, not with AI. You don't need to use AI. Your pipeline will be supported by AI in its rightful place,
Mm.
in service and support. Its prime directive will be to serve you.
Yeah.
It's not coming for you. It's it's not some nefarious boogeyman. It's a fact of the modern experience.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be a creator, you'll have to know how to wrestle this motherfucker to the ground.
Mm.
And and you do, and you can. It's not it's not hunting high and low to ruin
Mm.
our lives.
Yeah. Um,
So and ask me in 6 months
yeah, yeah, yeah. Be
um,
different story.
after we have to, you know, our robotic overlords have taken over everything. I really don't have that feeling at all.
Yeah.
I think it will find its place because it had to make a big splashy debut,
Mm.
right? But let's see what its follow-up album is.
Mm.
And I think everybody blows it out because it's the first time,
Yeah.
right? This is effectively uh this is Smells Like Teen Spirit. You're like,
Mm.
what else? Because the
Yeah.
first thing exploded
And also,
worldwide. It hit all the
I'm sick of it already. I'm sort of I see it pop up on the timeline, and I kind of skip past it now because I think I
Let's come to the end of its usefulness.
yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It had
Mm.
to make its proof of concept
Mm.
land with fanfare.
Mm.
And it certainly did that. It
Mm.
was for some artists, it was like a nuclear strike
Mm.
from orbit. They just said, "Oh my God, this is the end." And I said, "On the basis of what?"
Yeah. Well, let's
I'm not sure.
see what happens with that. Um,
It
like
really is a see what happens, but
yeah.
I think I'm comfortable saying, mark my words, it will find a support and service
Mm.
position for creators where it's suddenly just going to be running shit in the background for you.
Yeah.
That's boring and fucking time, a waste of time. You think it's part of your process, but it's
Yeah.
actually a time sink,
Yeah.
and it's going to handle things like it'll get, for example, if you want to do quick layouts for a story,
Mm.
and you can use your own sample size, so it's literally using your artwork
Mm.
as a fixed sample size and it's air gapped. It's not hitting anything else on the internet, and it samples your work and your work only.
Mm.
And you can listen. I need some ideas for, uh, give me 10 ideas for a new Batman illustration, and it's all based on your work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Go, oh well, that's how it should have been before. Well, it's not. It wasn't there yet.
Mm.
Get in it, and
Yeah.
using the logic of helping itself to the entire internet, unfettered and unlicensed, and with no apologies and no permissions. The sample size is limited. Suddenly, you're producing your own work, but you're coming up with amazing shit you never would have come up with in a tenth the time.
Mm.
And you go, well, is this I'm plagiarizing myself, or am I? Maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's just interpreting my ideas in a way, because we all have cart tracks in the dirt for our neural pathways. This is just simply a new way to interpret old data.
Yeah. Yeah.
And suddenly you're looking at a new version of yourself, and you go, well, what about that? All of a sudden, artists creating incredible work that they actually use their own sample size. They just looked at their own work, and suddenly they're reinterpreting their own work and doing incredible shit. And then come at me again and tell me how AI sucked. It gave them a second lease on life. I maintain that that's the most likely direction that this is going to end up going.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And if I turn out that I'm prognosticating in the wrong direction, I'll take that hit right on the button.
You can claim that this video is AI, can't you? This podcast. You just say I didn't
I'll
say
say,
that.
I never said any of that shit. What the? He's an honest filmmaker. How about profoundly dishonest? Just sampled my voice.
I'll get you to say anything. Well, you know what's crazy? Well, it's not crazy, but I did a test on this because I sometimes do some of these where it's just me talking about how to sell a movie, how to go to sales and distribution. And there's a site you can chuck your videos into, and it spits out any language you want, me talking that language. And I always thought I'd watch it and go, oh, I can tell that's not me. But I showed it to the kids and they were like, what? How could you speak French? It was seamless. It was seamless, me talking about film. And I'm like, but it's a ball ache. Do I want to release 10 versions of it in French? Am I then going to be able to respond to anybody?
In service and support. That's it. In service, support. And that is not nefarious at all. It's a huge time saver for you. Can you imagine having to try to hit with native level fluency all of these different language groups?
Yeah. It's crazy.
I'm learning Japanese, and I can fucking imagine just suddenly like having to do an entire 2-hour podcast in Japanese, mangling the language. Missing all attenuation.
I mean, soon it'll be doing real time on it. We'll be having a conversation, and it'll be real time translating. I mean, how amazing is that going to be?
Universal translator.
Yeah. We will fish.
These things terrible.
Yeah.
Things terrible. It's support and service. It's not conquest oriented. It's service positioned, and that's why I'm having such trouble with I don't even wade in anymore.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you want more advice from industry professionals who are out there at the moment working, or you just want to listen to some cool stories from film sets from around the world, then please do subscribe.